14:28 on a Monday afternoon, the 12th of May 2008, and suddenly the earth in Sichuan province in the foothills of the Tibetan Plateau in central China begins to shake extremely violently. It continues to do so for 2 minutes. The result, for those living on the land, devastating. Nearly 70,000 people killed and nearly 18,000 missing in the quake and the aftershocks. Millions of people also made homeless. It was a magnitude 8 earthquake at a depth of 19 kilometres. Many of the victims, school children and students, crushed as thousands of buildings simply collapsed during class. Agricultural land also wrecked. Some estimates say 12.5 million animals were wiped out.
Everything is knocked over.
Were you scared?
Yes, I was scared.
As of today, there are no more survivors. During the recovery operation, we dug many bodies up here. So now all that is left to do is to disinfect the place and then demolish it.
The quake was caused when a fault between the Earth's India and Eurasia plate ruptured, the fault breaking over a length of 240 kilometres. Well, the area is often hit by quakes. 9,000 people died in one in 1933. More recently, another quake in 2013, around 200 killed and thousands injured. Well, since the quakes, although there's been reconstruction on an enormous scale, entire towns being rebuilt, there remains extreme anger at the Chinese authorities for the lack of a proper investigation into whether shoddy construction, particularly of schools, has been to blame for the deaths of so many. So what is it like for those who lost their loved ones and those who continue to live with the fear that a quake could easily come again? Pierre-Philippe Berson and Tao Ma revisit Sichuan for France 24.
Here, tourists stop to take photos. For a few moments, they are motionless. For them, time has stopped, just like on the clock they are here to see. On the monument, the hands are broken, stuck forever at 2:28 p.m. It's a tragic moment in time for the entire country.
This clock symbolizes the exact time of the earthquake. It's a very important symbol.
I saw blocks of mountains falling down and taking trees with them. The future generations have to remember what happened that day.
The clock is in Yingshu, a city close to the epicenter. Before the earthquake, 10,000 people lived here. Now, only 2,500 of them are left. The rest did not survive the earthquake. These ruins are a stark reminder of the worst catastrophe China has seen in 20 years. 100 kilometers from the epicenter in the city of Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan, one survivor has rebuilt her life. Mrs. Zhang remembers that day, May 12, 2008, perfectly. But it's a day she wishes she could erase from her memory. She was working in a medicine factory in Yingshu. That day, like every other day, she came into work at 1 p.m.
Suddenly, all the walls started shaking. I was scared. I figured it was an earthquake. I hid under a table, but all the walls fell down. The table got smashed while I was still under it.
She was trapped under the rubble and survived by eating some cookies. She was finally rescued, but her left leg was badly injured. Years later, she still suffers. Now, at 38 years old, she also harbors an even greater pain.
This is him, my son, seen here with my sister. He was 3 years old. I dropped him at the kindergarten that morning and never saw him after that. When the earthquake started, he was napping. The rescue workers who found his body told me this.
The earthquake happened on a Monday when classrooms were filled with students. More than 9,000 children were killed that day.
After the quake, every time I saw a child, I cried. It reminded me of my son. For a long time, I could not accept the idea that I lost my child.
China has made an exception to its one-child policy for mothers like Mrs. Zhang, who lost a child in the earthquake. She was granted the right to have a second child. It's a very rare authorization given only to families in Sichuan who were affected by the earthquake. Her second son, Mingjiang, was born 18 months ago.
Since he was born, I'm totally focused on him. I feel that my life is useful for someone again.
Mrs. Zhang is raising her son alone. Her husband works 300 kilometers away from Yingshu and comes back once a month. Her family has been able to rebuild despite all that happened. Every year in early April, they respect the same tradition of honoring the dead. Mr. and Mrs. Chen come to the cemetery of Yingshu. They come here to pay tribute to their son Chenbo, who died in the earthquake. Following Chinese tradition, Mr. and Mrs. Chen burn fake banknotes in order to provide their son everything he needs in the afterlife. Their son was cremated, along with 3,000 other victims of the earthquake.
The name of my son is written here.
He died at home. He was about to go to work.
After sadness and contemplation comes the anger. Mr. and Mrs. Chen want to bring us to see the ruins of their former apartment on the other bank of the river.
Look, it was here.
19 people were killed here at the site of the former building. Among them, their son, who died in their home on the first floor when the building collapsed. In 2008, Mrs. Chen was 53 years old. The earthquake took her son and any possibility of her to be a mother again.
One friend took a picture of the neighborhood just after the earthquake. Bodies had been pulled out from the rubble. Among them, I recognized my son thanks to his clothes. It's the last image I have of him. I can't talk anymore.
Their building was not earthquake safe, and the Chen family did not know anything about the risks.
We did not know that the zone where we lived was dangerous. There was an earthquake in the 70s, but everybody had forgotten about it. Nobody warned us about the danger.
7 years after the earthquake, all signs of their old life have disappeared. But scars of the devastation are still visible in one city, Sichuan. Located in the epicenter, 80% of it was destroyed. Now, Sichuan is a museum, open to tourists, but closed to journalists. All of our applications to shoot footage were denied. So to get these images, we pretend to be tourists visiting the city and take pictures of the few buildings still standing.
Every TV channel talked about this city. I came from Shanghai to see that by myself.
I feel very emotional. It's quite impressive. It was the very first time that an earthquake made so many damages in the history of China.
Sichuan is a city that symbolizes the devastation. 20,000 people dead, 3/4 of its population. The high school was completely destroyed. The school had 2,000 students. 1,500 of them lost their lives. But in the ruins of Sichuan, there is no mention of this. The tour mentions the location of the former headquarters of the local Communist Party, of several administration buildings, but not a single word about the school. We ask people working at the entrance with a hidden camera. Excuse me, where is the former high school?
The high school? It was over there, but you can't see anything anymore. There's a museum now.
This is the museum, a 140,000 square meter building paying tribute to the firemen, the rescue workers, soldiers, and all of those who took part in the reconstruction of Sichuan. The greatest homage is for the politicians. 2 major rooms tell tourists about the glory of Hu Jintao, the president of China then, who came to Sichuan following the earthquake, and his prime minister, Wen Jiabao. The information also mentions Xi Jinping, the current president of China. At that time, he had just been appointed vice president.
They did a very good job. Our leaders did a wonderful job. I thank them for their courage.
But for the 1,500 high school students who died at the very location of this museum, there is not a single word, only one picture. Outside, men of the Communist Party come to us and want to get our footage. The tragedy of the children killed in the schools is a very sensitive topic. It hides a state scandal exposed by one man. He lives in Chengdu. A bête noire of the regime, he is constantly under police surveillance. We managed to elude this monitoring to meet with him. This man's name is Huang Qi. His revelations after the earthquake landed him in jail for 3 years. In 2008, in the aftermath of the catastrophe, he went into the field helping survivors in the most badly damaged zones. He is a human rights activist, and working among the devastation of the earthquake, one detail struck him.
If we zoom into these pictures of a school, we can see that there is no metal structure, no girder. Concrete blocks look empty. The building doesn't have any solid structure to it. It collapsed just a few seconds after the earthquake began. This is what we call a tofu school.
And as fragile as soybean paste, these kinds of buildings were totally destroyed. An entire generation of students gone, trapped in these schools that became their graves. But he says this slaughter could have been avoided.
This is an older school. It was built with a solid wood framework. And see, it's resisted. It is still standing. Just some pieces of the ceiling fell apart. Kids were only slightly hurt.
How to explain such criminal carelessness in a high-risk seismic zone? According to Huang Qi, these so-called tofu schools are being used in a hugely corrupt system, even at the highest levels.
The Ministry of Education, the local government, the Sichuan Communist Party, and of course some real estate companies, everybody. Everybody took benefit from it. Together they embezzled public money by buying bad quality material. They built the schools badly on purpose just to make some money.
Huang Qi published these revelations online, which upset many relatives of victims. They gathered to try to collectively sue the state. The authorities fired back. Huang Qi was arrested, convicted for violating state secret laws. His website was shut down and every protest declared illegal. In 2012, he was released, and now he keeps struggling against corruption, which he says has continued ever since.
I've been to more than 20 different reconstruction sites in cities destroyed by the earthquake, and everywhere I see tofu buildings. They are built in the same way as the tofu schools were before. Mistakes are being made. Nothing has changed. People's lives are once again at risk.
In Sichuan, the residents are starting to discover all the criminal dirty tricks and shady business practices by some political leaders. In order to prevent widespread protests, the government has chosen repression.
In 2008, all over China, censorship took over. Today, it is still very strict. We cannot say whatever we want.
Activists like Huang Qi are still strictly silenced. He is regularly harassed and may face new charges. For the relatives of the victims, authorities keep their mouths shut thanks to another tool: money. Mrs. Zhang, who lost her first child during the earthquake, goes 3 times a week to the hospital. She is one of the 300,000 people who were injured in the earthquake. Her left leg, caught under the rubble, had to be amputated. She still has pain and gets regular acupuncture treatment to relieve it.
This treatment is very expensive. It costs around 200 or 300 yuan per month. It's my biggest monthly expense, but I managed to pay for it myself.
That's around 35 euros per month. It's a lot of money for this former worker. Authorities granted her 10,000 euros after her son's death. The compensation depends on the age of the child. The younger the child, the higher the payment. This is the state's way of shutting down any protests against these tofu schools.
I've heard about those schools, that because they were so badly built, many pupils were killed. But I don't have any other detail. I don't know. I really don't know anything about it.
Little by little, authorities paint the tragedy as a simple natural disaster that has nothing to do with politics. However, it has raised awareness of corruption among the elite, now the main concern for the Chinese.
Pierre-Philippe Berson and Taomar revisiting Sichuan for us. Well, that is all from this edition. More, though, coming up, and you can watch more, of course, from our series on our website. That's France24.com. Thanks very much for watching.